Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Brown. I'm with GovernmentCIO. I'm Senior Vice President here, and I am happy to announce and moderate this particular panel this afternoon. I have with me Mr. Luis Coronado. He is the Director of IT Operations with the DHS. Also joining us is George Duchak, CIO for the Defense Logistics Agency. And from Dell, Mr. David Stickley. He's an executive and manages their strategic programs there. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thanks for joining.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Great, Sandy. So let's jump into it. Organizations are increasingly adopting cloud as the platform for their computing and managing some of their assets. With cybersecurity constantly being a theme that we hear, I want to talk a little bit today with you guys about what you're seeing with respect to cybersecurity in the cloud, and specifically the role that zero trust as a concept plays. With that, I'm going to ask Dave to kick us off, and a very specific question for you, Dave. I got to imagine you've seen a lot in your role. What does cloud security look like from a vendor perspective, and how generally should federal agencies and cloud vendors discuss cloud security needs?
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate the time today. Cloud security, wow, and zero trust. A lot of challenges in this world, and I would certainly say the age of COVID has taught us an awful lot about where our previous cybersecurity constructs may or may not be relevant in this age we're living in today. I want to touch on a couple of things if I could right up front before I dive into zero trust, which was your question. Our focus on cloud, I think, has maybe been a little skewed over the years. And I will freely admit that as a previous government executive, I might have been a party to this confusion over cloud as a destination as opposed to an operating model. I mean, we came out with cloud first policies where we were simply pushing our customers to get into the cloud. And we had a little conversation here before we came on the air about pushing COBOL-based applications into the cloud environment. Not everything operates well in the cloud, and that's just a fact. And so the way we look at cloud as an operating model is honestly the way that most of the industry is operating in the cloud today, in a hybrid mode. And what I'm seeing more so today is, traditionally we talk hybrid between your on-prem solution and a potential public or gov cloud solution. I'm seeing an awful lot of push to the edge today because our applications are starting to process at the edge. And so all of that transformation from a cloud standpoint brings new cybersecurity challenges. Fundamentally, what is zero trust? It is proactively controlling all of the interactions between your people, your data, and your information systems. That's really not new. People, data, information systems. The key word there is proactively. I mean, much of our cybersecurity response in the past has been very reactive. And we need to bring new tools that allow us to be proactive. And so essentially that path to zero trust focuses on device management. I mean, it focuses on access management. It focuses on network, risk management, automation, essentially new ways to deliver technology in each of those key areas. I would tell you, Alex, I think there are 7 essential pillars to zero trust as we look at it. At the user level, all sorts of new ways to authenticate users. And the big cloud providers provide some of that capability. There are new ways to manage our network security. We've been so focused on that perimeter security for so many years. We need to start from a network standpoint, securing more specific, at a more granular level, at the VM level even. Device security, obviously new ways to secure our devices. Commercial solutions for classified, new device trust solutions that industry is offering. Automation and orchestration across the entire spectrum from a cybersecurity standpoint. And the industry is delivering great new tools in that regard. And finally, I got to hit the buzzword bingo and say AI, ML at least once from an analytics standpoint, the ability to bring those analytics tools to the edge is so important. And I know we have a lot of questions, and I want to give my colleagues time to dive in. But that's my view of zero trust. It's really the same principles we've applied to our on-prem and edge cloud environments. And now we need to figure out how we mature those into a new hybrid cloud world.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. So George, with Dave said a mouthful, right? He talked about some fundamental tenets. He talked about the cloud being, kind of a journey and not necessarily a destination. How is DLA approaching zero trust and security in the cloud?
Well, we're just beginning that journey. So I'll tell you where we're at right now. We've just undertaken a pretty massive modernization effort to move our ERP systems to the cloud. And part of that is just a lifting and a shifting, and David's spot on with the idea of moving old applications to the cloud, and they'll just behave as old applications in the cloud rather than on-prem. So a good part of the modernization will be to refactor a lot of those applications, try to get the best benefits of the cloud. Secondly, as part of our modernization, we're creating a DLA platform. Rather than looking at individual systems, our users, they'll just be able to look at what capabilities they need to invoke and specific to their job. So as part of the DLA platform, we'll be instantiating personas. If you're a buyer, you only need to do these sorts of things and get to these sorts of applications on the network and get this data. If you're an analyst, you may have a different place of where you need to go on the network. So instantiating personas for the type of roles that you'll be doing is part and parcel to that zero trust journey. So we are continuously assessing who's on what application, where, when, and why. I'm not trusting anybody, basically. A culture of paranoia on the network. Because going to the cloud kind of removes that the old mental model of having this perimeter defense, the bastions where you knew what was coming in, what was going out. You don't have that anymore. So I think there's a good symbiosis between zero trust and cloud.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for that, Luis. I've spent some time in the DHS, and I can't remember a time when it was not at the top of the list of things to ensure that the infrastructure was secure. I want to talk with you a little bit about the types of technologies you all are using with respect to managing the various cloud platforms that you may leverage.
Sure. So we've been actually rolling out different capabilities to address cloud. I mean, we're in multiple different types of cloud. We're both in IaaS and SaaS primarily, a little bit of PaaS. But some of the tools that we've actually started rolling out are we have started leveraging a cloud access security broker. And that cloud access security broker allows us to extend our existing policies that we have on premise into the cloud environments, in addition to also providing us the visibility that we need across the multiple environments, regardless of whether it's an IaaS, a PaaS, or a SaaS. We're also looking into rolling out, and we're piloting right now, a cloud security gateway, which enables for us to be able to access your cloud services, like again your SaaSes, straight from an endpoint, and still do it securely, and still have that visibility to say it's being on the network versus being off the network. And this has been very important, obviously, as the current situation with COVID and the usage of VPN has obviously increased across, I think, across everywhere. So the cloud security gateway is another tool that we're leveraging to basically expand usage of cloud securely. In addition, also being able to go back inside of our network and be able to securely access applications, as it has that capability as well. And then lastly, the other thing that we're also piloting right now is actually a security validation platform. And that security validation platform allows us to be able to test our defense in depth for whenever we roll out, if we're going to go from cloud A to cloud B, but then we're starting to look at another cloud environment, figuring out what our actual security looks like from a defense in depth by being able to validate, different scenarios of when something is occurring here and then coming back on-prem, that we have visibility and ensuring that, all the triggers are triggering as that data is going from the cloud environment back to on-prem. So those are a couple of items we're.
Oh, great. And so this was a question that I had expected to ask a little later, but since both you and David brought up the pandemic, curious to know the implications, mass telework has had on the trust policies, the zero trust policies. Luis, you spoke about the various access methods depending on where individuals may be. Also interested in understanding your perspective on it. I got to imagine different organizations approach it differently, but it'd be good to see kind of what you have to say about that as well. So.
Sure. So we ended up, we nimbly adapted to the increased telework. We already had luckily my predecessors had prepared us for capacity. There was a snowstorm that occurred, I think it was in 2018, where we found out that we needed to increase our capacity to be able to support the workforce from a remote perspective. So that did help us being able to transition over to full-time telework for a majority of the enterprise. The other piece of it also was increased capacity to some of our data centers as well from a circuit perspective. But then also from the other thing that helped us was obviously the move to cloud services, right? We leveraged, the cloud services that we had rolled out for our business end, right, for the Office platform, and that definitely assisted us. And we had rolled out, tools like Teams, and everybody's using different tools like Zoom. There's multiple different tools that are out there that are available to support this, remote posture. But with that came risk, right? Figuring out, okay, well, how do we measure the risk and what's the risk that we're now willing to take? And truth be told, I think that because of the situation, and I think even George can probably talk about it from a DoD perspective, I think organizations were willing to take on maybe a little bit more risk due to the current situation. But what we did is we did analyze and look at, what is our visibility right now that we're getting when people are on the network inside of the wire, if you will, versus when they are connected through a VPN or connected through something like a cloud security gateway. And we did the analysis and did validate that we do have visibility because we also have endpoint protection as well. We have the ability to see what's going on with the endpoint. The other thing from a security perspective is vulnerability management. How do you ensure that you're patching and making sure that your configurations are still secure? And then that comes into question of whether or not you're leveraging network scanners versus agent-based scanners. So those things all came into play as we were going down this journey.
So, Alex, a tale of two stories. The Dell Federal team was already 100% in telework mode. So we had built our own Dell Federal network and have been operating in remote mode for several years. It was fascinating to watch DoD and their transition, where you had 5% of the department previously teleworking to 95% very shortly after post-COVID. They made it an amazing transformation, and I would tell you they focused on expanding what they knew, which was their VPN capability, and it was very successful. But the areas that we really saw innovation were on the secure side and on the SIPRNet side, where they really changed the paradigm and went after some new technology to enable workers to truly work from home on a secure network. So that was fascinating to watch.
Gotcha. George, I got to imagine you have something to add here.
A little bit. I mean, we're a lot like Luis. We're a pretty well established telework organization. So we really didn't skip a beat, when we went to massive telework. We are already, not my foresight, but my predecessor's foresight was smart enough to build out a telework capability for the entire organization, even though we never really used it. But it was prophetic now. But just like some of the cybersecurity aspects, where we use a VDI infrastructure with a mix of thick and thin clients, and the thin clients, patching not a problem, but the thick clients, we're relying on the users to actually download and install those, has been a perennial problem with the telework, where we just got to keep nudging them to update. So.
Right.
That's been a bit of I won't say a security issue, but it'd be nice if everybody just was on a thin client PDI, and then we could just patch everybody at the same time.
The other thing that also was, a great value was the update to the Trusted Internet Connection policy for, the federal government 3.0 when it came out, and, making risk-based decisions on the ability for you to go direct to a cloud service provider with some caveats, right? And that's what I mean as far as the analysis that we did was looking at some of those cloud service providers and, can you go direct, and, what is the risk there, and looking at what visibility you still have. So for example, if you're going to a SaaS tool for access that would normally come back into the data center, go out through the trusted internet connection, then up to the cloud versus going direct, what visibility do we have on it that changes from inside the network versus them connecting it directly from the endpoint, versus, through the VPN or not through the VPN. And we did validate that we do still have the same level of visibility so that we can still respond to anything that was to come up.
Great. Hey, well, that brings up a question that I have for you about service providers. And this is probably more for Luis and for George, but when it comes to contracting agreements with cloud service providers, how do you address the security needs, and what mistakes do you often see if you don't?
It's a good question. It's a very good question.
I have a perspective too.
So the thing is that, so, and I think the same is for DoD, because they have obviously, clauses within the contracts, and there's requirements there. I mean, for us, for cloud services, the first question we always ask is going to be whether or not they have FedRAMP. And the answers we get back vary, right? Because there's varying levels of FedRAMP. But in addition to that, we do have clauses within the contracts that do address security, and it's around the data, right? As far as the data, where is it going to be at? How are you protecting the data? And then also ensuring that as we kind of work with those providers, making sure that they are, number one, they have to have the FedRAMP, because if they don't have the FedRAMP, and then there's more work that we have to do to ensure that they're meeting our security requirements. That's a topic that I think we can spend a lot of time on. George, if you have anything to add on that.
No, I appreciate those insights. I guess we had a bit of an impedance mismatch between the folks who acquire services and our security folks. Unfortunately, for some of our early endeavors, our security folks were brought in at the end, like even after the contract was awarded, and say, here, now, what do you think? Rather than getting them involved right from the get-go and writing of the contract. So we're learning over time, not without some pain.
Dave?
Yeah, so, there has been a constant drumbeat about managed service, and you hear it across all the departments that what we want is a managed service delivery. And unfortunately, the difficulty in writing that into a contract has produced very little true managed service delivery. And I happen to believe that cybersecurity as a service is going to be a growing capability set. So I would just offer to my government colleagues that our inability to articulate managed service, whether it's IaaS or PaaS, you name it, is going to bleed over into a managed service cybersecurity delivery model. So we need to figure out that we need to work with our acquisition professionals and figure out how we properly align that ask to delivery with respect to cybersecurity.
Gotcha. Thanks. David, here's one for you. I think there's a lot of talk about securing applications, and there's questions about, do you secure the applications first, or do you secure the underlying cloud infrastructure first? Curious to know your thoughts on, what does it take to actually secure these applications in the cloud on a continuous basis? And if you have a recommendation or perspective on the sequence in which they are secured.
Well, I mean, the easy answer is very simple. In this new DevSecOps world, you build a cloud-native application. And the fundamental principles of DevSecOps allow you to truly bake security into that application. I mean, that is such a whole different world than what George is trying to do to move major ERPs into a public or government cloud environment. So the answer, Alex, is quite simple. And unfortunately, it's not easy when you're dealing with major ERPs. And that is use modern DevSecOps principles. Build your security into your software, build a lightweight portable software that can move quickly between the edge and the cloud. And cybersecurity is simply part of that development process. Again, a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to determine whether to refactor a major ERP. Those principles simply don't apply. So I certainly understand the challenges, but our view is you look at this workload by workload and determine where you can do some refactoring to help address specifically cybersecurity challenges, whether that's adding new authentication features, adding encryption into the mix. That is a process that we start early on through an apps rationalization process to work with a customer to figure out what's the best path forward from an application and cybersecurity standpoint.
So thanks for that. Speaking of encryption, Luis, what role does encryption play in the way the DHS approaches security?
So encryption, I think, is key for cloud, obviously, because of the fact that you don't own or maintain it, right? That goes back again to the risk where before, when we ran our own data centers and we maintained the data center from the physical environment all the way up the stack, maybe there was less of a need for encryption inside of a data center. But as you're moving your workloads into a cloud environment, it is highly important that you encrypt that data in any form that it's going to be out there, whether it's going to be at rest, in transit, or even in use. And depending on what kind of cloud that you're leveraging, it could be a little bit more difficult to do. If you're leveraging IaaS, you can pretty much control a lot of the encryption capabilities there without too much of an impact in regards to performance, which is another reason I think that some folks don't do a lot of encryption, because you're obviously looking at performance for your application. But the SaaS is another piece where you also want to ensure that you do encryption. And a lot of the SaaS do encrypt. It's just figuring out what type of methods they use. Are they using their own key that they issue out that you don't have control over, or is it a key that you can bring and provide to that software as a service? And then again, you have to look and figure out if it's a software as a service, the performance should be optimized in order for you to be able to do that encryption. But if you're building out an application yourself, from an IaaS perspective that you're sitting on top of your own infrastructure, the organization has to determine the best way to ensure that the encryption is being done. And again, it needs to be done not just in transit, but also at rest and also in use as well.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So a question for the group. I'm not steeped in security. I've dabbled in it, but I always recall one of the primary issues is understanding where the boundaries are and being able to secure those boundaries. With the boundaries now being nebulous, with data kind of being everywhere, it's within a cloud environment. What approaches do you take to ensure that security is able to adapt to protect the data?
It's interesting you bring up boundaries, because from a federal perspective, most boundaries are referred to from a FISMA boundary, right, as far as what a system looks like. And to your point, how do you actually do the system boundary around the data versus around the system, right? Especially as you start going into microservices, as you start going into different constructs. And I think we're starting to look at that and figure out, okay, well, how about platforms? Let's look at how we're going to be doing the actual boundary around a particular platform. You brought up DevSecOps. DevSecOps, you want to look at the platform that you're using to build out the capability, right? But then you're still also needing to look at the data and figure out, okay, well, how do we fit the data into a boundary if it's being built with this platform, but now it's being used all over the place? I think it's going to be dependent on where the data fully ends up at. Is it staying in the cloud, or is it moving around? Because if it moves around, that's where the boundary gets a little bit fuzzy from a data perspective, right? And from a FISMA perspective. And I think right now, FISMA is obviously, again, looking at systems, but the way that we are defining systems is evolving and changing, especially with cloud.
Gotcha. George?
I have to echo that and say that's why we do encryption, because you get past that one layer, then the next layer is to steal the data. Hopefully it'll stay encrypted.
Gotcha. David?
Yeah, I would just say boundaries truly don't exist the way we traditionally looked at boundaries. I mean, they're having all of your users inside a network security boundary simply hasn't existed for many, many years. And we have to look from a zero trust standpoint at that whole journey of capabilities, all the way from the user to the analytics, as I laid out in the front. It's a combination of those technologies that deliver you a cybersecurity solution. When you trust no one and nothing in your enterprise, you have to secure every piece of that connection. As I said, people, data, and info systems, and you got to go after and authenticate everyone through multiple means. You have to protect your data through multiple means. I mean, we've talked about encryption. There's obviously other ways, and ultimately secure all components of your information system, again, through multiple means. And that journey will continue for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's been just the paradigm shift. 10 years ago, everybody's worried about securing the network, making sure the plumbing, and assuming a way that if you didn't get into the plumbing, the data's safe. And now we're making that, we're inverting that thinking and saying, well, no, let's assume you've gotten in. Now let's protect the data and not assume the network is safe.
Well, that's fair enough. Thank you for that. So George, interested in your perspective on, the various security needs when you find yourself in a multi-cloud environment. And I'm not so sure if you guys are there just yet or headed in that direction, but I think they will require some different and unique things.
Yeah, that could be a blessing and a curse, I guess. From the multi-cloud environment, it's good to have competition, get vendor lock, things like that. But every cloud is managed a little bit differently. Every agreement you have has different specifications. So trying to figure out how to optimize for each one and then going across could be problematic. So.
Gotcha. Well, great. We're about to come up on time. There is one question that I have, I think, for the broader group, and it's when you think about the unique aspects, certainly from your various organizations, and we may not get time to get to this. If there is one thing that stands out with respect to DLA's needs and with respect to the DHS's needs, with respect to the way cloud is implemented, what would that be? The kind of the single most important point.
As far as I missed, I think the first part of that, as far as the way that we would like to see cloud implemented, is that the question?
Correct.
Or
the way that you would like to see cloud implemented? Securely.
I think that's the answer that we all want, obviously, is a secure implementation. I think one thing that I always mention this on discussions. So from a monitoring and visibility perspective, one thing that I've seen is that from a software as a service perspective, there are some variations on the level of visibility that you get. I would like to be able to see more of a standardization of, okay, from a visibility perspective, this is what you get across across all your SaaSes. What you get from vendor A versus vendor B can vary widely. And you have less control over a SaaS, right, versus what you can do with the infrastructure as a service. So I think that would be one point I would make.
Okay, George, we're coming up on time, but if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd say I have to agree exactly. I mean, the biggest rub that we have with cloud services is trying to understand who's responsible for what. What's the government responsible for? What's the cloud service provider responsible for? And sometimes, well, I wouldn't say sometimes, often we're surprised. And that's when we get into trouble.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. This has been insightful. We really do appreciate your time. We hope we'll have an opportunity to interface with you again on some of these topics in the future. So with that, I'm going to prepare to pass the baton to my colleague, Melissa Harris, who will moderate the next panel, which is focused on streamlining the ATO for the cloud.